I was around 16 at the time of this happening. Firstly, I would like to explain what type of person I am, so my actions make a bit of sense. I'm an average-looking girl, a bit overweight, which for my country makes me really undesirable. For this reason, I'm not used to males hitting on me or even consider it a possible occurrence back then. You can say that I'm usually the man in a group. You know, the girl that looks after every other friend when they're drinking. And if a guy is being rude or harassing someone, I'm the one to shut him down. I don't know why I took on this role. Probably because my friends are way too naive and nice. Well, I'm like that to strangers when I'm alone. I always try to be helpful to people if they look confused, or ask me for directions or anything else. On this particular night, I was going home from school. My high school is in the city center and I take the bus home. Since the buses get overcrowded during peak hours and I really hate being between crowds of people, I normally will wait around 30 minutes to an hour to catch the next bus. This night, I walked to another bus stop around 5 stops before the one to my school, so I could kill time and take an empty bus. It was dark and I was the only one on that stop. I usually don't have a problem with going out alone late at night, as I don't have the men are bad mentality drilled into me. So I'm just minding my own business when this 50-year-old man comes up to me. He has a very friendly face and a smile, so I don't think anything is off. He asked me something when I realized that he's Turkish. I tell him that I don't understand, so he uses basic Bulgarian words he knows, and I somehow understand that he's just asking for directions. Of course, I try my best to explain, and after I feel like he understood, I expect him to just stop talking to me. Nope. He sat disturbingly close to me and started talking to me, again in Turkish. I try to be polite and politely ignore him as best as I can, while nodding my head with a smile, looking at the timetable. For some reason, this guy starts asking me for my phone number. At this moment, I realized that this was definitely not only a lost foreigner. I try to shut him down saying that I don't have a phone. Don't ask why I thought that was going to work. I finally give in and tell him a random phone number, and he says something else to me, again in Turkish, and then the worst thing happens. All this time, I'm looking at the 1 minute the bus will be coming in. I'm praying for him to please to not try to call the number. And well, he does. And he shows me and asks me why my phone isn't ringing. My stomach just flipped. I tried to think of something fast. And then I remembered that I had my old Motorola in my bag. I usually brought it to school to give it to teachers who collected phones during class. Also, I liked playing games on it. In 2014, yeah. Fortunately, the battery was dead, so I just pretended that this is the reason the call isn't going through. I see this guy try to argue, but at this moment, the bus comes and I get on. I sit in the seat behind the driver, as always. But after 10 minutes, I get this weird feeling. I don't know what it was, but I felt like I was being watched. So I looked around, but since I'm in the front seat, I can't exactly see everything. Luckily, our buses have this gigantic mirror on the inside that shows the entire bus. I look into that and I can clearly see him. He's sitting on the last seat, his legs clearly visible, and I start to panic. I'm still not sure that he's following me, but I'm also a very cautious person, so I can't really ignore this. I start checking for him at every stop and he's still there. I get paranoid and I say screw it and I get off the bus. The stop was at our local mall and luckily it worked until 10 p.m. I decided to go in, and if he follows then I'll try to sneak out. And he follows alright. You have to understand that in my town, almost nobody goes out after 9 p.m., so the mall is close to empty. I look around, thinking of ways to disappear on him, but there is just no way. The mall is an open space and there are 3 floors, all almost empty. I would be easily spotted anywhere. Now you'll probably say, you should have asked the security for help. No, in Bulgaria we don't do that. That literally never even went through my mind. The security is just some grandpa that walks around all day. They don't actually do work or anything. If it were today, I might not be as stupid. But back then, this wasn't even an option in my head. And besides, the security wasn't even around. So I do the most logical thing I can do, and decided to utilize the knowledge that I had acquired in the previous week. You see, the mall had a cool corridor system behind the stores. It was completely unmarked by any signs, and if you didn't know where you were going, you would probably get lost. Because it's just endless white corridors that lead to empty rooms for storage or some other stuff. Well, me being an avid anime fan, I loved going around these corridors and pretending that I'm a ninja from Naruto on a mission. So I can probably say that I learned the right path to the back stairway of the mall. Because I was smart and obsessed with the idea of being a spy, I decided to lure this creepy guy in the corridors and then just go out from the back end of the mall. I first entered H&M and pretended to look around, just to see if he was really following me. He didn't even try to hide it. He just stood outside of the store staring in. I got really scared for a second. But then I remembered I'm like the best 007 agent out there, so I just continued walking around the mall. I finally entered the corridors, and at this point, I booked it to the staircase. I ran out and then didn't stop running for 2 bus stops. I tried looking back, but there was no one, so I proudly decided that I'm a hero and I went home. Today, being a 21-year-old grown-up, I just think about how stupid that is, and how I would probably be 10 times as scared today as I was back then. Well, I hope it never comes to that. I have a lot of creepy things that have happened to me. I might get around to share some more. When I was 16, I would nanny for 2 boys, Brandon, 8 years old, and Randy, 15. Randy had mental health problems because he was born with liquid in his brain or something. Either way, he was a sweetheart, but you could tell something was off by the way that he walked and moved his hands. They had a dog, Gunner, that was an Akita and Yellow Lab mix. This dog was huge and protective, and I watched the kids every other week all day, Monday through Friday. Gunner watched everything I did the first week, and I had to gain this dog's trust. That first week, the dog made me uneasy because if I was with the kids and they'd start being loud and rambunctious, he would get between me and the boys and start growling, even if I wasn't playing with them and happened to be near them. But Gunner learned to trust me really quick though. There were 2 times that Gunner saved our lives. Story 1. The boys lived in a rough neighborhood, not scary but just rough around the edges. We went for a walk to the playground a couple of blocks away and a white van slowed down by us. There was a bunch of guys yelling at us from the window, saying inappropriate things to me and calling Randy horrible names about his condition. "Just ignore them, guys," I said in a hushed voice, as I shifted and put myself and Gunner between the kids. Gunner didn't take his eyes off the van full of them. The tension pulled the fur on his back straight up, signaling to us that he was in protective mode. As the men kept yelling at us, I pulled my phone out and started dialing 911, but I didn't hit send before Brandon started yelling back, defending his brother. And then everything happened so fast. The slider back door to the van opened and 2 men jumped out. "Run!" I remember screaming at the boys, just as Gunner ripped himself free from my grip on his leash. Everybody started running but me. The boys sprinted home and the dog sprinted towards the van, and I frantically tried dialing 911. Gunner chased the men back in the van and nearly grabbed at the leg of one man, and they sped off. Gunner received a lot of treats and praises when we returned home. Story 2. This one really freaks me out. I was allowed to have friends stop by since I practically lived there and the boys liked hanging out with my wholesome teenage friends. If it was a male though, I would have to go outside and hug them where Gunner could see, and talk to them for a few minutes on the porch. Gunner would assess them. Normally, he would let them inside without trouble after that, but there was one friend that he wouldn't let inside without coaxing. Gunnar would never bite anyone unless actually attacked, just for context. One day, a man came to the door, knocked and said that he had to drop something off for their mom who was supposedly expecting it. We could see through the window and he seemed like a gentleman and was very nice, but as I approached the door, Gunnar cut me off. He started barking at the door insanely. His back stood higher than my hips, and at the time I was a small girl and the dog just forced me back. Gunnar literally prevented me from being able to reach the doorknob. He was gentle with me but forceful. I yelled back to the guy to leave whatever it was on the porch, but he seemed insistent, saying things like, "Can you really not just unlock the door for a minute? Come on, Randy knows me." But I had to tell him that I physically couldn't get past the door, so I could call the imam for him. The man got weird and was like, "No, that's not necessary. I'll come back another time," and he rushed off. Anyway, the guy had some distinct features, and when I described him to the imam later, she informed me that she had no idea who he was, and that she wasn't expecting anything. We never found out who he was, and he never came back. So thanks, Gunnar. You're the best. I'll never forget that night. It was last year and I had just turned 25. I had been to a friend's wedding in another state and was returning by train. I reached the station around 5 a.m. It was freezing as the temperature had hit 4 degrees, and all I could think about was getting home fast so I could sleep for hours after being tired from many nights. I generally avoided traveling alone in dark, but it was impossible to wait at the station until sunrise because 1 hour seemed like a very long time, so I decided to get a taxi. The distance from the station to my apartment is roughly 40 kilometers. There were 2 taxis and I got into one of them, without making any eye contact with the driver. I told him where I wanted to go and we started. This man must have been in his late 50s or early 60s. He had silver gray hair with a big build. I decided to go with this taxi because I thought I would be more safe with this fellow since he was elderly. Boy, it was a big mistake. Nearly 15 to 20 minutes had passed and I was looking at the road ahead. There were very few cars and all I could see were trees that were close by and fog covered everything else. Suddenly, I noticed that this guy had been staring at me from the rearview mirror and he didn't blink or look away when I looked at him. It had been over 2 minutes and he was still staring. He had scary, droopy eyes. I was very uncomfortable at this point, so I used my scarf to cover half my face, which was only covering my neck all this while. But this didn't stop him, and he suddenly started laughing like a maniac. And then he said a word in some other language I believe that I couldn't understand, so I asked him to repeat. My heart was beating very fast. "So many people are dying," he said, and he started laughing again. I was too afraid to ask him any questions, but I stood there frozen, regretting why I didn't wait at the station. My hands were shivering because I was trying to send a message to a friend, but my fingers just couldn't type properly. He turned around, now facing me, asking me if I was married. I managed to speak nervously no, and he said, "You will repent." With these words, he started to speed up. My mind was going crazy now. What the heck did he mean by that? Why would he say such a thing to me? I tried looking around if it was a good idea to get off that taxi, but it was still very dark and there weren't many cars around. Maybe 2 or 3 cars would pass every 10 minutes. By this point, I was pretty convinced that he was taking me to some other place. Maybe he wasn't, but I was too terrified to think straight. I was trembling with fear and I was sure he was going to attack me or do something worse. Suddenly, he slowed down and he seemed to be talking to himself. "People die, you'll die, she'll die," pointing to the empty seat. With those words, he stopped the taxi right there and asked me to get down, saying, "We need fresh air and the petrol is over." He wasn't drunk, but he had been hallucinating since he kept blabbering, looking at the empty seat and was laughing for no reason. Arguing with him could make him annoyed, so I decided to do as he said, until I got some help, or maybe I could stop him in some way by agreeing to all his demands. I got off the taxi and this guy got off too. Now he was right in front of me, but at a car-length distance, holding a lit torch, pointing it on his neck and repeating, "You will repent." I was almost crying due to fear, but running was impossible because I could have been run over by some car due to the fog, and my mind was not working properly by this point. The thoughts of calling someone didn't occur to me earlier, and now it was too risky since this maniac was standing right there, holding that torch, and moving his head like some possessed person. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, and his eyes appeared bigger than normal due to the torchlight that illuminated his creepy, now serious face. He said something again which I didn't understand. I was sure that he was going to charge me or continue to mess with me before that. I was extremely restless and looking around for help. To my relief, there was a car passing by and it stopped there looking at us, just standing in the middle of the road. The guy came running to me and asked me to go towards his car, where his daughter, who was nearly my age, opened the door. The insane cab driver ran back to his taxi and drove off in seconds. Clearly, there was enough petrol. I was still breathing heavily and told them that what had happened in the last 30 or 40 minutes. They told me that I was in the opposite direction and it was not a safe area, since many incidents with girls had happened there already. I was right. The driver had taken me to some other place. They had sensed something was wrong by the way that maniac stood there holding the torch, and that light showed my silhouette more clearly, so they decided to check on what was going on. Had they not stopped, I wouldn't be alive to narrate this incident. Since that night, I never travel alone at night. Never ever. I'm thankful to those people who saved my life. Sometimes we see many people who say they need help, but we fear that it could be a trap and we don't stop. Had they thought the same, I would be dead. I am currently living in the Middle East. One night, I decided to go mall strolling and watch movies with a friend of mine. We stayed there for quite a few hours and didn't realize that it was already late. We had parted ways and she went home first and I was still waiting for the cab that I had booked. When the driver came, he was perfectly fine, nothing sketchy. Or so I thought. He was just quite annoying. He was asking too much, questions upon questions. What was my name, where I originally came from, how long was I staying abroad, where and what was my work, if I had kids or a significant other. It felt inappropriate, so I refused to answer some of his questions. I just nervous laughed to signal that I was getting uncomfortable, but he still kept throwing me questions. I didn't have the heart to tell him to stop asking or to let him know that it was making me feel uncomfortable, so I messaged my friend to call me. We have this safe word we say to each other if we need help exiting from a horrible person, a conversation, or a situation, and so she called. We were talking already, but he was still murmuring some things. A few seconds later, he turned the radio up and the volume up, loud enough for me to barely understand my friend. This is where I kind of got really scared. And then he started holding my other hand, like that scene from Titanic when Jack was intertwining his hands with roses. A scene that I wished I would get to experience too, but not in a situation like that. And then my mind suddenly shut down. I froze and didn't know what to do. And then I suddenly heard my friend's voice, still on the line, screaming, "Are you still alive?" I came to my senses and shouted, "Let me down." He said no. I told him that I was going to call the police on him if he didn't. And so he stopped and dropped me off somewhere still far from my home, at freaking 12 a.m. I called my sister to come pick me up. She came, and when we got home, I was so thankful that I was alive. For 1 second, I thought that that might be the end of me.